Hi everyone, and welcome to the video podcast for Security Magazine. I'm Ian Thornton-Trump, CISO of Cyjax, and today, back by almost popular demand, I would have to say, Philip Ingram, OBE, the owner and CEO of Hare Media. Great to see you again, Philip.
Good to be here. MBE. MBE stands for My Beep Efforts instead of others' beep efforts.
I got you.
So we get that. But good to be back. And I'll pass you the suitcase of money for saying popular.
No, it's really true. Because we started the video podcast with you and I think maybe we had done one before, but at the beginning of the war in the Ukraine, and now we're transitioning to the next phase of the war in the Ukraine. So I couldn't think of a better guest to have on. As of today, we're looking at the May 9th date.
Yep.
Do you want to maybe explain a little bit about how that's important in the Russian psychology and in the background of the current conflict?
Yeah, the May 9th is the date that Russia celebrates its victory over Nazi Germany in the Second World War. And that's when they have their huge Red Square parades where you see all the new kit being put out, lots of troops in their best finery goose-stepping down through Red Square, Putin and previous Russian leaders and then Soviet leaders, because it's a throwover from Soviet days, would give their State of the Nation type speech and state where they're going to go forward. So with what's going on in Ukraine, I'm pretty certain that Vladimir Putin wanted to turn around and say, we have changed the government inside Ukraine, we've denazified Ukraine, we've toppled these Nazi-supporting politicians that are there, and the glorious Russia is victorious and Ukraine is now back in the fold. He's failed.
That's going to be a bit of a stretch.
Yes.
I was going to say, and also interestingly enough, the parade, is this maybe why Russia is silently conscripting people because they've run out of actual army?
No, I don't think so. For the parade, and you and I have both been on parades like this, it takes a lot of rehearsal time. This is not something you can throw together with a few conscripts and all the rest of it at short notice. So he will have had to keep some of his troops back. It doesn't need to be that many, but enough to be able to drive the equipment, to maintain the equipment that's going through there, and to do the parading bit and all the practice that's needed for that. Because they are fairly smart when they get together, and that takes months and months and months of practice. I suspect after the parade, lots of them will be heading off to the front line very quickly.
That's what I was going to say. So we may see a surge after that May 9th date in terms of new Russian formations showing up.
Well, yeah, but it all depends on what Putin actually decides to do on May 9th. He can't declare victory over Ukraine. He's lost that completely.
Would be maybe even too much for the Russian propaganda.
He'll want to do something. And at the minute, we're seeing a real push to try and clear the Azov steel facility in Mariupol. And I think his only victory that he might get is there's a possibility he might be able to clear it by the 9th. Well, this is currently Thursday beforehand. It's going to be very, very difficult for him to clear it completely, but I think he might declare he has done, so that he's then got that land corridor from Crimea the whole way through southern Ukraine, up through the disputed element of the Donbass region and into Russia, and that may be something that he claims as a bit of a victory.
Let's zoom in on that, because I agree with you that it's a very strategic place right now. There's about 2,000 some wounded defenders versus what, 10, 15,000 Russian troops?
It's difficult to work out the numbers, and whenever you get into complexes like that, 50 people can hold off 500 or 5,000 people very easily.
That's right.
A couple of good snipers in the right place, and you're going to stop people getting into there. And that's exactly what they're doing. And they've got the understanding of the tunnel complex. They can pop up in different places. They can pop up in the city and then hit the Russian forces from behind. So the advantage of them maintaining that from a defensive position, even if there's only 10 men left that's in there, what it's doing is it's tying down huge numbers of Russian troops who won't want to leave them alone. They need to be there to try and secure them, and they don't know how many people are there. They don't know where they're going to pop up, and that's stopping Russian troops, Russian formations and all the rest of it from then going and joining the main battle that they're looking at, expanding the disputed Donbass region out to the greater geographic boundaries of it with the Lushank and
Donbass.
Donbass oblasts.
Right.
So the different regions out of there, because the disputed area that they've got at the minute is only about a third to half of those geographic regions.
So let's zoom out into the land part of this campaign right now. We've seen aggressive Ukrainian counterattack and defensive operations, which have prevented, I think, Russian breakthroughs, generally speaking. There seems to be, again, Ukraine impetus for potentially counterattacking, maybe even to relieve Mariupol. That would be a huge move. NATO has now decided, and European countries have decided, to start sending heavy weapons. Is that going to be a game changer? Because I know they're sending things like the 777 howitzers and G-parts, but are the Ukrainian troops ready to rock and roll on that equipment, or are they going to need workup time?
Well, they need a bit of workup time, but remember, the Ukrainian troops have been training with Western militaries since I went through the first Advanced Command Staff College course at the British Staff College in '97, and had Ukrainian officers on the course with me, and I've been training not just their staff officers but their lower level NCOs and all the rest of it. So they will pick it up pretty quickly. And it's Europe, it's the United States, it's the world as well. The Australians have sent some 777s and some Bushmaster armoured vehicles, armoured taxis, effectively, into the fight.
And even Canada sent 4 guns.
Yeah, so it is a global piece, and yes, there will be a game changer. And it's interesting. The Russians, if you look at their tactics, they have not been able to manoeuvre their armoured formations on the ground as armoured formations. They're using them as their tanks as sort of static pillboxes that they then drive to the next static position and try and move elsewhere. They're trying to get artillery battles and use their artillery. They're doing a little bit better than they did on the attack in Kiev, but they're still not getting it right. And there's 2 reasons why they're not been able to use their combined arms in the way that you'd expect them to. The first one is they don't know how to do it. Yep. So their commanders aren't up to it, their logistics aren't up to it, their lower level commanders and operators are not up to it because they've never practiced it. Their exercises are all pre-scripted, and therefore they don't understand the complexity of bringing it all together. The second thing is, it's even more basic, is the ground. It's spring in Ukraine, coming out of the winter, the ground is thawed, it's very, very wet, and we've all seen pictures of Russian tanks getting bogged in, and Russian trucks getting bogged in, and Ukrainian tractors coming in, having a fantastic harvest of military equipment. The Russians are probably the biggest single supplier of working military equipment to the Ukrainians across the world, and that's what we're seeing. And the Ukrainians aren't going to be in a position to properly counterattack with a manoeuvre formation until the ground is right for it. Because other than that, the best thing they can do is defend, which they're doing very, very well indeed.
So it's interesting because to zoom in on that particular aspect, I saw a video that went through YouTube where there's one Ukrainian anti-tank a small group of guys with one anti-tank missile system, 4 Russian tanks about 2.5 kilometers crested on a ditch, sat there, and all 4 were destroyed. Yeah. There wasn't a single shot back from the Russians. There was not even any attempt to pull back into smoke. And to even fire high explosive back at that anti-tank missile battery. To me, it looked like there was no real fight in the Russians at all. And I'm wondering if they were if they parked and then got out of the vehicles before they were killed, so they didn't have to actually go into battle against
possibly. But again, what that says is it's very, very simple anti-ambush drills. They don't know them. They haven't practiced them. The crews don't know them. So the crews have been told to go to a position, drive onto that position, and sit there and wait for the next order to come in to do something. And the next order, unfortunately, is preceded by an in-law or a javelin missile.
With what you have left, advance to the next.
And the guys in the vehicle next door go, "Oh, that's interesting. That vehicle's just gone bang. Yeah. What do we do?" "Well, I don't know what we do. We wait for orders. Bang! Your vehicle goes. Oh, there's 2 of them gone. What do we do?" Yeah, there's no, as you say, popping smoke and reversing out fast.
It's like a Russian version of Blackadder right now. So let's now go to the sea battle, because there was the big Moskva sinking,
Yep.
and the entire sort of like state of the Russian Navy was revealed, I think, in that encounter, and also the earlier encounter where Ukrainian ballistic missiles managed to take out an Alligator class landing craft, and thus kind of impacting and thwarting the potential naval landing in Odessa. What is the state of the Russian Navy right now?
Well, it's interesting. Putin over the years has invested a lot of money trying to get the Russian Navy back up again. As Putin came into power, the Russian Navy was effectively confined to port. Its ships didn't work. His first year in power was the sinking of the Kursk, the nuclear submarine, with the loss of all hands on board. And he's tried to invest money in getting the Navy built up again. But we know that investing in navies is expensive. His defence budget is less than the British defence budget, and it's a tiny fraction of what the American defence budget is, never mind the whole of NATO's defence budget. Yeah. And this stuff is expensive. And he doesn't have the money to do it. So he's done piecemeal in a lot of places to get things sort of steaming. He's got his tanks that can drive, he's got his ships that can go from A to B, but it's interesting, his one aircraft carrier goes everywhere with a couple of tugs. Because it breaks down so often. And that, I think, sums up the state of the Navy from an operational perspective. If you're not investing in the propulsion mechanisms and the mechanisms that are needed to make a ship work, then you're not having the ability to invest in the weapon systems to protect the ship, because that's even more expensive. And if you haven't got those, you haven't then trained your crews and your captains and all the rest of it in how to use those and use them together and look at them in a high threat environment. And that's what we saw with the sinking of the Moskva. It was tootling around in the Black Sea, well within range of the Ukrainian anti-ship missiles. They knew the Ukrainians had anti-ship missiles. Anyone would have known what the range was. It's really easy to do.
Measure it.
They've got rulers, and they'll have known that they're in place for that. And their electronic countermeasure systems and their alien systems should have picked up the Ukrainian radars searching for them and gone, oh, we're within range of the radar of that missile. We shouldn't be here. Let's move fast. And they didn't.
Yeah, I think they were very comfortable sitting on lawn chairs watching cruise missiles being launched into the Ukraine, and felt like that there was no requirement for operational security at wartime levels.
And see, there's an optics to that. If you look at where they've used the ships beforehand, they've used sea-launched. The equivalent of the sea-launched cruise missile and all the rest of it. They've used them into Syria and they've used them elsewhere. And the way Russian television has put it out is they've projected it in exactly the same way as we saw the sea-launched cruise missiles and everything else going into the Gulf War from the US and the Allied launches that have happened. And therefore, it's getting the optics right for that. So a lot of what Russia does with its military equipment is all optics, optics, optics. So the parade in Red Square is optics. The Moskva steaming around is optics. The tanks that they've got and the armoured capabilities that they've got on the ground and the aircraft that they're flying, it's all optics. But what we're finding is that the capability isn't necessarily behind all of those optics.
So if the surface warfare assets of the Russians are lacking, what's going on below the surface of the ocean? Because obviously there is a bunch of equipment that the Russians have that's designed to launch nuclear weapon systems. NATO has spent decades perfecting the art of anti-submarine warfare. Is it fair to say that before the launch tubes can even open, there might be a whole bunch of NATO assets to deal with that very quickly and very efficiently?
Well, I think if we look at what's been going wrong with the Russians, they can't get their basic tactics right. They use their very best ground formations to try and attack into Kiev in the first place. Their specialist troops that are the most highly trained of the lot couldn't get their basic tactics right, so they failed. Their very best of their naval troops, surface naval troops, haven't been able to get their tactics right and look at things from the wider threat perspective. And they're not even following their own doctrine. So they're loosely looking at it. So it's really easy, therefore, for defenders to try and predict what it is that they're going to do next and how they're going to do it. It's a natural assumption. I think it's one that you can easily make that if they're getting it wrong on the land and they're getting it wrong on the surface of the sea and they're getting it wrong in the air because they're losing a lot of aircraft, then the chances are that they're going to be getting it wrong under the sea. And therefore, there's a lot of effort put in to try and track Russian ballistic missile submarines by the US, UK, and other nations. France, the Scandinavian countries. Some of them are neutral, some of them are NATO, but they will know exactly where they've been operating from through all the different fleets. And it wouldn't surprise me if it's a little bit crowded around them, underneath, beside, and over, and all the rest of it, as people sneak around trying to follow them.
So you did say something about getting it wrong. Where is the Air Force?
Well, yeah, it's the one thing that I've been trying to work out the whole way through this campaign. The Russians should have been able to secure air superiority from the outset. It looks as if they didn't even try before they put the first air mobile operation in to try and secure Kiev. Well,
that was a disaster.
That's a fundamental military mistake.
Yeah.
It's a basic stuff, and they haven't achieved air superiority at all yet. The Ukrainians are still flying fixed-wing aircraft. I've seen only yesterday pictures of rotary-wing aircraft, Mi-8s, flying.
Those might even be the new ones that the Americans have
They could well be. Lots of UAVs and lots of Ukrainian air defence is still working. And actually we're enhancing Ukrainian air defence. So they have not got air superiority at all. And something's gone wrong with their Air Force. And I suspect what it's probably down to is if you look at it, and you look at a lot of the weapon systems that they're using when they do go in, they're using dumb bombs, they're not using smart bombs.
That's right.
I think they've run out of money. I think whenever it came to enhancing things, we've seen all the stuff about this hypersonic missile. I call it the hyperbolics missile. Whenever you're looking at it, that's a big investment. The T-14 Armata tank, a T-80 is what, $1 million. A T-14 is coming in at about $10 million. The Russians can't afford them.
Yeah.
You then look at the expense in the surface fleet, and there will be a lot of investment in the subsea fleet because they've got more nuclear boats out to sea. The Air Force is clearly the one that has been falling behind and hasn't had that level of investment in it. Even their Su-31s and all the rest of it, there are a lot going in, but they don't seem to be that effective. And their new Ka-52 attack helicopters don't seem to be doing very well at all.
No. So it's interesting. So we kind of went through, the land, the sea, and the air. There's always the cyber, right? And I've been really outspoken on a couple of areas. The first was that there was this great prediction of Russian global cyber war, which has not come to pass yet. Also, I want to say that the amateur hour attempts by the Russians to inflict cyber war into Ukraine seem to have come to a head with their decision to now attack power plants.
Yeah.
And more also to your point, no one is attempting to suggest that all of the fires of Russian national critical infrastructure, such as petroleum production and an ammo munitions manufacturer, is anything related to cyber. I think it was overhyped. I think that the capabilities of Russia, especially in terms of the vaunted capabilities, have been thwarted by Western technology right off the bat.
It has, but it also scares Russia. We go back to WannaCry in 2017, and that was a targeted attack against Ukrainian business.
Right, which then got out of the box.
Which then went wild, and the Russian Ministry of Defense suffered greatly because of it. So the Russians.
And actually, you mean not Petra?
Not Petya.
Because WannaCry was the...
Yeah, WannaCry was North Korea.
Yeah.
Not WannaCry. I always mix the two of those up.
Easy to do because their essence was the shadow brokers, NSA malware. Yeah. So they kind of cooked it together, stirred the pot, and let it go.
Exactly. So that I think was the Russians trying it out. Remember they've been working on Ukraine since...
really 2014 with... The Operation Armageddon, which was that attempt to wide-ranging cyber attacks.
Yeah, well, and the annexation of Crimea, but Putin's been doing his information operation from about 2003 on this. That's right. So they've been testing all of the elements of what they need to do to carry out this operation, and finding them wanting. The other thing is, this is where you see all the Western leaders turning around saying, "Hey, the grey zone is the way conflict's going to go in the future. It's all going to be cyber. It's all going to be this. No, not in a kinetic war where people are firing shells at you and bullets and
that's just
missiles and all the rest of it. You cannot interdict that with cyber.
No,
it ain't going to happen. And that's why cyber isn't big here. And the other thing is, if Russia used cyber and it escaped, it's being hit hard enough by the international community for what it's doing inside Ukraine, but it's instantly taken it outside Ukraine. And there have already been statements, the Secretary of NATO has turned around and said, well, there are circumstances where a cyber attack could be construed as an Article 5 incident.
That's right.
And Russia, Putin is a psychopath. Putin is getting a lot wrong, but he's not stupid, and he knows that he can't win in a straight fight against NATO and doesn't want to do anything to bring NATO in. So there's been a lot of cyber hype within the West because that's been an easy way to try and reduce defence budgets.
Yes.
And talk about the grey zone and not buy big green or big grey shiny things and park them in tank parks or airfields or
or have parades with them.
And have parades with them. Yeah, exactly. And I think Ukraine is showing that that's not really the way it needs to be.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. And I guess what folks want to hear from us in this particular podcast is, what are the long-term ramifications? I've written a little bit about that. You and I have had some great discussions. May 9th looming. What's Russia's next moves, do you think?
Yeah, this is a real difficulty. Russia may turn around and say what they captured so far, if they get Mariupol, is enough. And say, we've denazified Mariupol, we've got rid of the Azov regiment that's there. That was the Nazi regiment. We therefore denazified Ukraine, and then they tried to sue for peace. Will Zelensky accept that? No, not a hope in hell. And should he accept it? No, definitely not. And therefore, there'll be a period of things calming down potentially a little bit before it then ramps up again. Has Russia the ability to beat the Ukrainians and push them further away? No. Have the Ukrainians potentially got the ability, with all the new weapon systems coming in, to start to kick the Russians out? Yes. That's very dangerous then, because Putin can't afford to lose under any circumstances. And that's when he would want to potentially do something to force people's hands to come to the negotiating table. And one of those ways is the potential use of a small tactical nuclear weapon to turn around and say, right, this is it, I've got this, boom. Next one's on Kiev or Lviv or somewhere else, and therefore negotiate. Give me what I've taken, and I'll walk away. I'll let you walk away, and we'll sign a peace deal and everything else. But I've got that. Would the West respond in a nuclear way to that? I don't think so.
No, I think that if Russia used a tactical nuclear weapon or chemical weapons, there was an attempt to suggest that they already did, which there hasn't been anything.
Chemical weapons aren't an act of war in this.
Yeah, but I think all NATO would do at that point would be respond kinetically with the overwhelming strength they already have. And to be fair, the first 72 hours of a NATO all-out Air Force campaign against the Russians, it
would destroy them.
There would be nothing left except smoking hubcaps.
NATO will have 8-figure grid references for every lump of Russian metal that's stuck inside Ukraine at the moment, and that's just fact.
Which is interesting because the NATO assets that have been obviously assisting the Ukraine, I don't think that's any secret, but NATO drones, NATO E3s, rivet joints, Artemis, all of those platforms have been involved in helping the Ukrainians target, Russian generals, critical logistical assets for the Russians. So there is NATO's, I think, huge presence in that ISTAR role, that intelligence and surveillance tracking and targeting role. All they need to do is feed that data to their own platforms, which are
and they'll have greater fidelity than they're feeding the Ukrainians because of the classifications a lot of this will work at. So if that goes into a Five Eyes targeting cell, all of those pieces of equipment will disappear. If it goes into a NATO targeting cell, the fidelity will still be there, but it exists, and therefore the Russians haven't got a hope in hell. But it's difficult. There is a much longer term issue that no matter what the Russians do, no matter what the outcome of this is something that I don't think we're seeing enough discussion about at the moment amongst the international community, because it is going to affect the international community.
It is, yeah.
There's two things in that. One, it's the terrorist and serious organised crime exploitation of what is now lying around on the streets of Ukraine and everything else, and people trafficking and everything else. And then, as you wrote in the paper, there's the wider economic implications across the globe because of Ukraine's importance as a massive wheat producing and oil producing country when it comes to growing it. And the crops aren't going to get grown or harvested in the same way this year, and export's going to be difficult, and that's not just going to have an impact on Ukraine, but that's going to have an impact across the globe on many poorer countries, and that in itself is going to have secondary and tertiary effects that will then come back and affect the West.
I'm glad you brought both of those areas up, because there is talk, and we've seen some articles alluding to the fact that Putin may be removed. So I do remember, I was obviously very young when a vehicle during the military parade came up. Some guys got out of it. They had loaded weapons and they shot, was it the president of Libya or Egypt? There was an assassination during a military parade.
Yeah, I can't remember.
You remember? I remember seeing them throwing chairs on top of the prime minister of that country. Well, we'll put it into the show notes on it. Chairs to prevent all of the bullets from hitting that person. I'm wondering if there is, you see it in the papers and you don't know if it's speculation or if that's somebody spilling the goods. But generally, if your plan to overthrow the leader of a country is published in the newspapers, it's probably not a plan at that point, right? It's an aborted attempt at a discussion. So, what are your thoughts on a surprise removal of Putin? Is it in the cards even?
Well, I think it has to be on the cards at some stage. The difficulty is, and we go back to Hitler and compare it to Hitler. People tried to remove Hitler several times through the Second World War, and the difficulty is, and some of the people that were trying to remove him were in his inner circle, and that's what we're trying to do with giving the truth into the inner circle in Russia by putting the sanctions on the oligarchs, by affecting his inner circle are all rich people. They all want access to their international money and their international holidays and their big yachts and everything else. They haven't got it now, so they're going to be pissed off. But the difficulty is Putin will divide and conquer. With his whole inner circle, and even if one person is trying to stir up an anti-Putin move to overthrow him, that one person won't know whether the person that he's talking to he can actually trust completely or not, and therefore we've seen a little bit of a purge in some of the staff that are there, and that's going to be as much of Putin turning around and saying, hang on, if you're talking about removing me, you don't know who is telling me that you're doing that, and you're going off to take up a window cleaning job and fall out from the 9th floor, or have a heart attack. You choose which it's going to be today. And that in itself will keep him fairly secure, because even if people are becoming disaffected, they're going to be scared about coming together to discuss what they need to do. And to overthrow a president with the level of power that he's got, it needs to be a team effort. So that team, in an environment where there are so many intelligence sources looking out for that sort of thing, is going to be very difficult to pull together. May the 9th would be a good one. If they could do it, and they could do it on the parade and do it very visibly, that would be a very good way of showing the world that something has changed, especially if the new leader stood up and said, and I have ordered all of Russian troops to withdraw from all of Ukraine. We will sit and negotiate with the Ukrainians reparations and everything else. The war is at an end. I don't think it's going to happen, though.
Well, I think it would be spectacular to see a 125 millimeter solution delivered to the podium. But we did mention about how, let's assume the Russian leader survives. Let's assume that the war continues. I postulated that food and exports become the next Russian weapon for destabilization of various peripheral nations. The contagion of the Ukraine war, though, is significant. They're talking about a 40% plus reduction in the gross domestic product production of the Ukraine.
Yep.
That's massive. They're talking about the EU is discussing very heavily, depending on whether or not they can cajole Hungary to agree to this, to no more Russian petroleum or energy products by 2023.
Yep.
This is a massive move, and obviously once you compensate for Russian energy supplies with green initiatives and just buying it from other countries, you've shut down Russia's main energy leverage. Russia, though, major producer of wheat and agricultural products to countries traditionally a lot cheaper and a lot easier to access those markets than, say, America, who is the number one producer of agricultural goods in the world by far. Some people will argue that it's China, but actually China, even though it is the world's largest producer, also imports.
It imports a huge amount.
Extra,
one of the biggest importers.
One of the biggest importers. So the question really becomes, if the taps are turned off to Russian energy, the next major thing that Russia exports is agricultural goods. They've degraded and stolen Ukraine's grain, as well as their ridiculous attempt to steal the John Deere tractors that were then remotely disabled. I love that story. It was like, what do you mean we need to activate the tractor to use it? It's crazy. Finally, though, we're into this new paradigm where the starving mob in various countries could be leveraged.
Yeah.
And when I look at the most strategic partner of Russia right now, it's Turkey.
Yes.
Turkey controls the keys to the Bosphorus and the ability to move assets from the Black Sea into the conflict. Do you think that's a big factor, or do you think that generally Russia may shy away from doing that because it is such a provocative move?
No, I think we've already seen Russia flex its energy arm. We're seeing it stealing grain from Ukraine. Ukraine's not going to be able to produce enough grain. Russia will still be producing, still be the breadbasket. And I think that's probably part of the reason why China, India and Pakistan are all sitting on the fence, because to feed their populace, they need the grain and the oil from Ukraine and from Russia. They also need the energy that's there to come from somewhere. And if they can't turn those taps off. Now, they're big enough to be able to bat off the international community and continue to take grain and oil and foodstuffs and oil and gas for energy from Russia and not be affected by what the international community's opinion is. However, all of that stuff is then not getting onto the international market, and the international market's price is going to go through the roof. That's going to affect an awful lot of other third world countries, especially around Africa, especially around South America, and elsewhere, and other countries in Southeast Asia. And that's going to have a destabilizing effect, because it's going to affect the local economies. It's going to affect the global economy, because we're going to get global price rises. Local economies are, and we're already seeing this in Sri Lanka, where there's been protests, which has brought all of the three different ethnic communities together protesting against the government for the first time since the Sri Lankan Civil War, or long before that. And that's just going to grow elsewhere. What's that going to do? It'll destabilize different countries, but it'll also create additional potential refugees and economic refugees trying to get out of their countries to look for somewhere else that they can go. Well, we've got the problems already with refugees trying to cross the channel into the UK.
We do.
We've got one of the biggest refugee crisis coming out of Ukraine
since post-World War II.
Since World War II. Now, hopefully that's going to be temporary, but it's still putting a burden on all the European countries and elsewhere. And for that to be exacerbated by more economic refugees and migrants trying to get out, and the potential for more civil wars around the place, we're in a very, very dangerous time. Throw in a little despot somewhere like North Korea. Oh, who's got access to nuclear weapons? And he keeps practicing with his new missiles and everything else. There's a tinderbox, and someone's standing over it. And it's not just a tinderbox, it's someone's poured petrol over it and is striking matches. And one of them might just take.
I think that's a great place to leave it at this point, because the ramifications of this are going to be felt for 5, 10 years, maybe even a generation. Thank you so much for joining us today, Philip. It's been an amazing around the world trip. And a really detailed look at the land, sea, and air battles that are going on, and what the state of Russia capabilities are today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.